good afternoon to everyone. I welcome all of you to the Shakespeare Sabha's Theatre Festival, Dasta 2014. Before we begin, I request all of you to please keep your mobile phones on silent, and while the discussion is going on, please do not enter and leave. The Shakespeare Sabha is the multilingual dramatic society of St. Stephen's College. We seek to incorporate the diverse languages and cultures of the many regions of India in our production. We have also made an attempt to promote theatre across various platforms, including street plays, traditional theatre on stage, as well as experimental open-air theatre. Theatre tells stories, interprets them, enacts them, and brings them to life, be it on stage or on the streets. The Shakespeare Sabha, in an attempt to explore and stretch the many boundaries of theatre, decided to organize the first ever theatre festival at St. Stephen's College, Dasta. The events under Dasta include Bhasha, the multilingual one-act play competition, Anhat, the inter-college street play competition, and a theatre conference. Today, as part of our inaugural to Dasta 2014, we begin with the theatre conference. After much discussion on what the conference should center on, we decided to discuss an issue that comes up very often when one encounters theatre at a college level. Theatre at a college level offers the option of either continuing with conventional theatre, or adapting or writing socially relevant plays, or to build on the basics and experiment beyond what has already been learned. This experimentation is often hindered by the pressure of competitive theatre and the limited time within which all of this has to be done. Faced with such diverse options, we want to explore how flexible is the campus theatre format to encourage experimentation in bringing out the creative potential of the learners. Before I introduce our keynote speaker for today, I'd like to request the principal to say a few words.
Good afternoon. This will be a formality, don't worry. This will be over. I only want to place on record my appreciation for what Shakespeare Sabha has ventured through this year. First time ever in the history of the college. Particularly laudable is the effort to capture and celebrate the variety and diversity that our country offers. I'm sure all of you are aware of the fact that St. Stephen's College has a very special emphasis on this. We make an attempt to have the student have represented in the student body the various cultures, languages, traditions, lifestyles, cuisines of the country. So in that sense, what the Shakespeare Sabha is doing this year is in complete consonance with the vision and character of our college. And I believe that as a people, we can do better with a little bit more of experimentation. Somehow it has happened that we have developed a genius for imitation rather than experimentation. And it's high time we moved on. And for me, the theatre plays an extremely important role in the life of the college. It's an important ingredient in the total education this college wants to impart. Because it is a concentrated form of creativity. I cannot imagine the human without the creative. To be human is to be creative. And again, I'm going to close my words. We need to make very special efforts to enrich and celebrate the creativity in us, because life is becoming more and more mechanical. That plasticity of the being is compromised. I believe that that's hugely unfortunate. And opportunities like what the theatre offers can be a good corrective to this. So for the Shakespeare Sabha to organize events like this, I think in my experience the first time. And I hope this is not being done in competition with the other branch of the Shakespeare Society. But I think healthy competition is welcome, particularly in this age of globalization, privatization, liberalization, which must flourish on competition, open competition. So it's a good thing. So I'd like to see this new beginning consolidated. It can only add immense value to the academic welfare. And I want to thank the panelists, ably led by Ashley, for their gracious goodwill to the college in finding time to come and share their expertise, rich as they are, with all of us. And I wish all of you a very happy time. Thank you.
Our keynote speaker for today is Mr. Barry John. Mr. Action Group from 1973 to 1999, Delhi's most acclaimed theatre company. Mr. John was on the faculty of the National School of Drama from 1977 to 80, teaching and directing young actors. He was also founder director of NSD's Theatre and Education Company from 1989 to 92. As a pioneer in the establishment of drama and theatre studies at the school level, he has created a syllabus for these subjects for the NCERT. He has also pioneered drama therapy in working with differently abled and deprived people. He has conducted training workshops for numerous national theatre companies and institutions, including the FTII in Pune and for many Bollywood films. Mr. John has also acted in Indian and Hollywood films, including Shatranj Ke Khiladi, Masi Sahib, Gandhi, Tamas, Miss Beatty's Children, Shaheed Udham Singh, The Last Viceroy, The Frontier Gandhi, Tere Bin Laden and Thanks Ma. He has also acted in the internationally acclaimed play Othello, a play in black and white by Royston Abel, which won a Fringe First Award at the Edinburgh Festival and has since travelled worldwide. Mr. John has a national award from the Sangeet Natak Academy and awards from the Sahitya Kala Parishad and the Delhi Natya Sangh. His book, Playing for Real, a handbook of games and exercises for actors, is published by NACTV. I invite Mr. Barry John to deliver the keynote address for Dastan 24.
Forgive me, I need a script. I haven't learned my lines. Ad-lib, I wish. Yes, initially I wasn't sure to come whether I had anything very enlightening to say on this subject at all, largely because it's been a number of years since I've worked on a campus, worked with college students on a production or even a workshop or training of any description. And as I know, things change. So I'm not quite sure what the current scenario is. Things have changed in St. Stephen's, in the number of societies and competitive spirit that's being encouraged between them, and so on. And for other reasons which will become self-evident once I get into this. In writing these notes, the first thing I wrote was, is anything new? Every story has already been told, and every form and convention has already been used. So the question being raised today about campus theatre is as old as the hills, actually. It has been raised about all forms of theatre, in fact, throughout its checkered history. Further, it has been raised in the context of all other performing arts, as well as the fine arts and plastic arts and literature. Even further, it has been raised in the policy making of social institutions that govern law, education, health, science, technology, industry, defense, and international relations. Every new generation asks itself, What do we keep? What do we throw out? What do we feel has become irrelevant? What has grown to be more important and to stake a claim in our affairs and practices? I'm not going to answer this. I mean, these are questions, of course, those doing the theatre and being responsible for the societies in college and their activities. These are the questions you would confront, I imagine. Naturally, the world changes. Actually, naturally was a comment on those questions. Things do become more important. There is a need to keep certain things, but there's also a need to throw certain things out. Naturally. Naturally, the world changes. That is, our understanding, our perception of it changes. We change the world, more and more so. Bertolt Brecht famously said, the world is man-made and therefore changeable. Karl Marx said it, and so did Adolf Hitler, each in their unique way. The slogan has been extended to read even more truthfully as, the world is man-made and therefore changeable for better or worse. Who decides that? Should things change? This is with reference to the conservative, orthodox elements in society who hold stubbornly to certain ideas, beliefs, practices that they maintain are eternal, sacrosanct, and therefore unchangeable. They are often enshrined in texts which allegedly are divinely inspired, if not the Word of God itself, and they become commandments. Whether that text be a Ved, a Shastra, a Bible, a Talmud, a Quran, an Origin of the Species, a Communist Manifesto, or a book on method acting, it will propel its followers to tear the world apart in defense of it. There is no dearth of illustrations of this. Large fractions of humankind seem resistant to change. The universe itself turns in repetitive cyclical patterns which give us our limited understanding of time. As with other forms of animal life, we are programmed into a mechanical synergy and dependence on these patterns. We fall into secure and comforting routines, unthinking routines, devoid of fear, shock, or panic as far as possible. Habit is a great deadener, wrote Samuel Beckett. Ideas akin to these were crystallized in the gods Apollo and Dionysus of Greek mythology. Apollo, the sun god, the god of light and therefore enlightenment, who related to the rational, ordered, and self-disciplined aspects of human nature. Dionysus was the god of the grape, and therefore wine and fertility, in celebration of which an annual festival of plays was performed. He relates to the sensual, spontaneous, and emotional aspects of human nature. I first learned about this, I'm going to digress a little, kindly excuse this small indulgence, in one of the earliest plays I directed right here in St. Stephen's. It was an experimental adaptation of Euripides' play, The Bacchae, or the followers of Bacchus, another name for Dionysus. It was called The Disorderly Women. and was placed in the 1960s context of the hippie movement. Their flower power faith in drugs, sex, and rock and roll was born out of a rejection of Apollonian man's patriarchal strictures and its agenda of violent warfare and profit-obsessed capitalism. Dionysus's first entry in that production was down the central aisle of the auditorium, up a ramp and onto the stage, riding a bullet motorcycle. Another anecdote is with reference to a philosophy student who became a cult figure after stripping down to his Y-fronts in order to wear a skirt and a tube top. He shall remain anonymous. Unless he's here. I don't see him. But yeah. During the same period, in the early 1970s, I remember two experimental productions directed by Siddharth Basu, also a student of St. Stephen. One was Jean-Claude Vanitali's play, The Serpent, a very physical collage of biblical themes performed in the college chapel. The other was Bertolt Brecht's early play, Baal, which was performed in a science lab somewhere. My geography is not that hot. You still have science labs? With the small, intimate audience sitting up on the workbenches around the room. It was poor theatre at its poorest and purest. By that I do not refer to the quality of the performances, but to the fact that it was theatre stripped of everything but its essentials. Performers, a space, and an audience. It did not try to hide anything. There was no set, no stage lighting. Simple, suggestive props and costumes were the only luxury. And music, if I remember correctly. These were trends that were developed in the West, inspired by the French visionary Antonin Artaud, and pioneered by Jerzy Grotowski in Poland, Peter Brook in France, and Joseph Chaikin in the USA, most notably. One of the plays Siddharth Basu did is one of Joseph Chaikin's company productions. And there is some irony in the fact that they were all these pioneers were inspired by Asian theatre forms. Japanese No and Kabuki, Peking opera, Balinese dance forms, and Indian Kathakali especially, or certain other South Indian forms. In their desire to move away from the realistic idioms of the well-made play and set in the picture frame, set in the picture postcard frame of a proscenium arch. Proscenium arch is that which the stage usually is built under. You look through it like you look through a picture frame, for those who don't know. Again, the new was being fashioned out of the old. The proscenium arch in auditoria was developed in the 17th century, and for the first time theatre was completely enclosed in its own architecture. The concept became entrenched through the next few hundred years, and we still unthinkingly adhere to it, even in schools and colleges, where far more flexible and multi-purpose spaces are a requirement. There's a sad lack of imagination and a wastage of money in the auditoria that are constructed, which in themselves delimit the extent that experimentation and creativity might be licensed in their usage. What what does an experimental theatre space consist of? Does anyone know? That's an open question while I take a drink of water. We want to do experimental theatre. What's an experimental theatre space look like, consist of?
It can as well be the proscenium. It can as well be the proscenium. I mean, experimental is inside proscenium, outside an area. And it can be your toilet.
Well, if you could knock it down in the process, or remove it, perhaps. But the proscenium arch implies that the stage is one side of it, where the act is performed, and the other side of it is the auditorium, with fixed seating, and where...
But somebody like Robert Wilson, he would do his work, it is very experimental. And
Yes, they all do. So does Peter Brook, work out of a ruined theatre in the middle of Paris. There are, these options, but how many of us, when you hire an auditorium or you think to use an auditorium, how many would go with this kind of imagination, to tear it down or to turn it inside out or upside down? But still, with beyond the proscenium arch, regardless of how you use. Any idea?
You just need space. Everything else you create. Out of that, your audience could be part of the play. It could be sitting. It could be anything. So it's a space. That's all you need.
Already existing space.
I mean, you could do it here.
See me afterwards. We could do it here. True, yeah. Of course, this is made for a performance. Every teacher is a performer with an audience to entertain. Not allowed to fall asleep. Wake up that boy in the background. Yes, you're right. It could be anything. Indoors or outdoors. Doesn't need to be a building, a construction of anything at all. It can be a natural landscape. Even within the precincts of, well, I'll come to this. Shall I carry on? Nobody's very forthcoming. No? Any concept?
You're asking me.
Yeah.
I'm coming to look at you.
KFC gives you all the money in the world you need to build an experimental theatre.
Oh, don't talk to me about it.
No, I could squeeze it out of you. Just
So
imagine.
what you're asking people to respond to is the black box, right? So that's what
I
you're
don't
asking
know.
for?
Who knows what a black box is? Even a proscenium theatre generally is a shoebox, as I call it. There's not much scope. What other spaces are there?
What I meant
You know, you've obviously travelled.
No, I'm not traveling. I'm a student of performance studies, by the way, so
Oh.
I've read and seen, not traveling. But what I'm trying to point towards is that spaces, the street is a space. It need not always be experimental.
Acha?
I'm asking.
Who has seen a well-made play performed in the street, or a Shakespeare? Anyone who's been to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival knows exactly what I'm talking about. During August of every year, the whole city gives itself over to a celebration of the arts. There are performances day and night in the streets, in historical monuments, in churches, in school and university spaces, in the basements of derelict houses, in lofts, in tents, in parks, and in pubs. Last one sounds good, no? That's the Fringe. The mainstream festival of plays, opera, ballet, and contemporary dance take place, of course, in the city's proscenium theatres. The high art still has to be in its proscenium context. And there's a literary festival thrown in for good measure. In a way, every new performance, whether it's labeled conventional or experimental, is experimental. In one sense. In the sense that there is no guarantee of success. With a classic or evergreen play interpreted in a conventional way, there's always scope for things to go wrong, for it not to work. The director may be unhinged as he goes through his third divorce case. The actors have been miscast. The actors clearly do not get on well with each other and are acting out their personal relationships rather than those of the characters in the story. The design is cumbersome and the scene changes are adding 30 minutes to the duration. The lights operator keeps falling asleep. In every new production, there are multiple creative choices to be made. The cast and crew comprise a new living organism, and what chemistry occurs among them is unpredictable. The sponsors back out, so the budget on the sets and costumes is cut by 75%, making it impossible for the designer to materialize his vision for the play. And even if nothing goes wrong, the audience may still fail to connect with it for reasons unknown. It's a mystery. Have you seen Shakespeare in Love? That line keeps being repeated in that film. It's a mystery. Conversely, even the most far-out experiment may resonate with the audience. They may not completely keep pace with it at an intellectual level, but yet there are visuals which keep them glued, or an energy, a tension, or an emotional truth which rivets them. It's something akin to watching a foreign movie without the subtitles. Like all experience, it acts upon us both consciously and subconsciously. I'm moving on to my next point. Nearly there. It's a fact that our audiences, young or mature, lack exposure to all kinds of theatre. In Delhi, for example, I imagine most people have never been to the theatre. Have never experienced a play in the theatre. Most people living in Delhi would not have gone to a theatre to see a play. It's not a habit. Most will have visited a cinema, however. Some years ago, when the Delhi government conceived a weekend theatre program that would take it out of Mandi House and popularize it in far-flung colonies, it was difficult to locate a sufficient number of auditoria that were in working order. The desire to get theatre out of Mandi House, if the audience, obviously Delhi has become so vast, how can you expect people in far-flung colonies to converge on Mandi House just to watch a play? This was even before the metro was fully active. So let theatre do the moving and the shifting and the touring. Except there were no spaces for them to visit. That made it a practical idea. And soon closed down that whole program. At school level, I'm going to be repeating myself for some of my friends. Despite the announcement of a new arts policy for schools by the central government in 2006, which recommended that drama and theatre studies be compulsory up to class 8 and an optional examinable subject up to class 12, and despite the NCERT having given the NSD the task of developing a theatre syllabus for schools, classes 1 to 12, which was accomplished by the year 2008, there is still no urgent forward movement to put the syllabus into practice. Though just lately there has been some announcement, even though it is not happening yet and will not happen for several years hence, they at least have reached the point of publicizing the idea, the intention. I mention this because if that syllabus were in use in schools by now, our discussions today would be at a much more advanced level. And there would be no doubt that experimentation is a vital and compulsory aspect of working in this field. With a balance of theoretical and practical studies, it clearly promotes it is clearly promoted as being a career-oriented body of skills. I'm talking about the syllabus still. Exploring acting, directing, designing, writing, as well as the production issues of lighting, stage management, budgeting, and business management. Can you imagine yourselves today having undergone a 12-year grounding in Indian and world theatre forms, having awareness of its key historical developments, having sampled its key texts, and having developed within your bodies, your minds, and hearts the means to make your own theatre? At undergrad level, how many colleges have theatre departments? Where can you work at a BA or a BFA in theatre? An MA or a PhD? Where can you turn your passion into a professional qualification? Even if you could, where would you turn that professional qualification into salaried employment? The answer is in the production companies working in the film and television industry, which is mostly what happens. Theatre's talent migrates to the electronic media. They have grown exponentially over recent decades. So rapidly that demand outstrips supply. They happily employ theatre actors as script writers, for example, especially if they are from the northern Hindi belt, because they do at least speak the lingo. There are very know rather than what you know. Usually then you embark on an apprenticeship, a process of learning by doing under the guidance of someone more experienced. I guess the same could be said of theatre for most people. Anyway, I have meandered shamelessly around the topic and offered some rather self-indulgent perspectives in the process. When I started these notes, I was not clear what the content might touch upon. So it's a rather shapeless stream of consciousness. I had hoped to be able to give it a more logical progression, but time to do that has not been available. I'll wind up with a bullet point summary of the content. 1. Changing the status quo of anything is never easy in a democratic system. 2. We are creatures of habit and are fearful of change. 3. There's a continuum in our human nature, according to the ancient Greeks, which at one extreme craves the rational, the ordered, and the disciplined. The other extreme licenses the sensual, the spontaneous, and the emotional. 1, 2, 3, 4. To see theatre caged in a proscenium stage, following realistic conventions, is signing its death warrant. 5. Theatre can be located anywhere, indoors or outdoors. 6. Every playmaking project is an experiment, a whole bunch of creative choices to be made. Last point, our historical situation has us lacking in exposure to the full panoply of theatre's forms and usages. And it behoves us to embark upon a program of rigorous study, scholarship and research, both theoretical and practical, in order to redress the balance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barijan. I would now like to begin the panel discussion, but before I hand it over to Mr. Ashley, I'd like to just introduce our panelists for today. We have Gautam Arora, who has been practicing theatre in Delhi for many years now. As an active member of the Players, the Theatre Society of Kirorimal College, he has acted in and directed several plays, including Israel Horowitz's Line, which he directed in 2010, which was showcased at FTII and various other venues. After graduating, he founded the Delhi-based theatre ensemble called Dvandva Collective, where he also conducts workshops in different schools. At present, he is working on a documentary film based on gender violence. Our second panelist today is Shomik Dasgupta. Shomik Dasgupta is an MPhil scholar. He is currently studying theatre and performance studies at JNU. He has acted in plays at Jadavpur University as well as the productions at St. Stephen's during his MA. He has also worked as a dramaturge and stage manager at various other reputed productions, including Shuktara Lal's adaptation of Charlotte Keithley's My Mother Said I Never Should, and Obonti Chakraborty's adaptation of Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire. And moderating our talk today is Mr. N.P. Ashley. Dramaturge and theatre researcher N.P. Ashley teaches English at St. Stephen's College. His scripts and adaptations have been staged at numerous international and national festivals in India and abroad. He has also presented papers at various conferences on different aspects of performance study, especially on theatre historical. So,
I want to look at this whole notion of campus theatre, which is, and Brecht. My favorite definition of theatre is the Brechtian one, where he says theatre is a social laboratory. And the problem with thinking of theatre as a social laboratory in India is that there's very little society in theatre, in the act of producing theatre. Like Mr. Barijan said, there are very few people who've gone for a play in Delhi, and then how can you do a social experiment, how can you think of the institution of theatre as a social laboratory, then if the society is not so well connected with that. That's where the idea of campus becomes important, because I think campus, in its etymological sense, field helps us. Field is usually understood as a closed space, and campus is understood as a place for archiving and emanating knowledge in a systematic way, a space of socializing, a space of improvising on the ideas, a space that houses youth, which in some sense, both metaphorically and demographically, points to epochal changes. So when you have this kind of a desocialization of theatre as an institution, can we turn to the closed space of campus and look at that as a possible field for rethinking, experimenting, and reinventing the idea of theatre? So as a training ground, as a space for experimentation, as a space for evolution of artistic models and so on and so forth. And how does the various aspects of theatre, acting, directing, dramaturgy, research and so on and so forth, or how does its politics, right? Like, to give you one simple example, like 20, 30 years ago, you would talk of good theatre was always subversive theatre, and David Wiles in his recent book on theatre and citizenship says it has just become two different things. Good theatre doesn't have to be subversive theatre anymore. So there are these kinds of changes, right? So when we look at campus theatre as an entity, as a possibility, as a site of exploration, what are we looking at, and what are the possibilities? What are the limitations that are imposed historically, that is imposed on it institutionally? What are the possibilities, and so on? I think that's what two of our panelists, Gautam Arora, who was doing a great deal of theatre and who's actually taken it up as career elsewhere, and Shamil Dakota, who also was a campus theatre person, who's now pursuing research in it in terms of understanding the body in the Bengali theatre and so on, and training methods and so on. So I first request Gautam to speak for about 15 minutes, and then followed by Shamil, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Right? Yeah. Okay. The question is, it can compulsory to speak for 15 minutes? Not really, but that's about the upper limit.
Okay, I passed out in the year 2012, so my observations will be based only for, like, I know a lot of things have changed in campus theatre, but essentially the 3 years of theatre that I've done, and my observations of what I felt when I was in KMC doing theatre and what I feel. I've generally seen the plays that are made, they don't seem to travel, in the sense that I feel that a performance, every performance is a new performance, and I think with time it has to travel, and that's why I feel that the plays in campus now have become very stagnant, in the sense that whenever I go for a performance, whenever I repeat some shows, I feel that it's exactly the same show and exactly the same lines delivered at the same time, and that's why I feel campus is lacking, and we can. That's where I feel the experimentation also lies. I mean, there can be experimentation in the lines that the actor takes, the experimentation in the light design, the experimentation in the sound. I really feel sound is something which is lacking. Like, I really feel there's a lot of scope in sound designing and designing of sounds in plays. I mean, we can think of getting live instruments on stage. I've just seen recorded popular tracks in plays and so forth, I feel. Also, I feel this element of humor in campus theatre is sometimes I just don't seem to understand. I feel that a lot of humor that we see in plays recently is catered to a specific section of the audience. And for me, then it becomes more like a college-specific humor or a college-specific joke. And that's where the question of who's your real audience comes into play for me. I mean, are you really doing a play only for a specific section of audience, or I think you should expand your horizon and cater to a larger section. I mean, that's what I also feel sometimes. For me, I think in a play, I think the situation has to be comedy. The situation has to be humorous and not laughing at stereotypes. Like, it's sad that in some plays I've seen a person who is fat is used as a humor element, and so that it's just a college-specific joke and not to a larger audience. And also, I remember when I was in my third year and I was directing, there's always this time of, yes, I do want to experiment, but then their performance is lined up and the shows which are running out. And that's why I feel that I'm not talking about larger, bigger experiments, but there can be experiments in your characterizations. There can be experimentations in the way you've written your script, in the way you're adapting your scripts. And I think that scope of experimentation is not limited to just performances, because a play, there are always non-competitive performances. I mean, I know that we have fests, and sadly in campus these are the only platforms. But I think the real test for any play is to perform elsewhere and perform exactly like perform for a specific set of audience for which your play actually you're thought of as a director. So so that way I feel that you shouldn't be limited to just the performances that are lined up, and there's always a sense of, there's always a scope for experimenting and changing your characterization and changing your moments whenever you're performing. Also, a lot of times finances becomes a problem. You have as a director a lot of set designs in your mind, and then the college sadly doesn't support you. So it's something which is very, it's an unfortunate situation. But I remember I attended a scenography workshop by Deepan Sivaraman. He's working with NSD, and that's when I got to know there's so much scope in changing your stage completely. He showed us plays in which there were revolving stages and there were different lights coming in using metal pipes and all as sets. But it obviously made me aware of the certain kinds of experimentation which were just beyond my horizon when I was in college. But that's also an option, and that's where you have to strike a balance between how much funds that you can support, and there can always be a solution of tailor-making your sets. That's what I have done recently. That's what players always does generally. And also, I feel that as a director, I think the most important thing is what are you as a director giving to the play. In the sense, I feel that yes, you've picked up a play by a playwright, but then I sometimes feel that your personal stand is something which I find generally missing. In the sense that I feel a play is your own baby, and what are you as a director, what are you as a college giving to the play is sometimes I feel it's lacking. I remember when Line had come to Stevens, the judges had specifically mentioned that there were a few colleges who didn't even mention the playwright's name, and that was obviously shocking. But on the other hand, if you feel that it is that specific college's play, then what are you as directors giving to the play? Sometimes I also feel, yes, there's experimentation on one hand, but then also there's a director's stand, which is also lacking generally. My last point is, I think campus, this age of 18 till 21, it's a very inquisitive age, and it's an age where you're constantly learning by watching performances outside. And this campus space it's beautiful because it's a hidden trial space. You're not burdened by a professional pressure. There's no producer who's funding your play who's going to say, but boss, I wanted this scene and not that scene. So I really feel there's a lot of scope of experimentation, and a play essentially has to travel with time, and I think we should all aim for that. That's broadly I want to say.
Yeah. So, hi. When Rahul had asked me to talk or be part of this panel, I had constantly gone on asking him. Talk with my friend Pramona Sengupta, who did her bachelor's from LSR, because she is working on campus theatre, and this is just not my field. I am not working on this. I do not have much of an idea of the DU campus theatre as well. But then Rahul said something which made me start thinking. Rahul said that, well, you can speak on our behalf. We have worked with both society and we have worked with Sabha. So share that experience, talk about things from that. And well, let's start broadening the scope. I'll be largely looking at my deriving experiences and examples from my experience of being in theatre from my Jadavpur University days to Delhi University and now in JNU, these three spectrums and the things that I'm observing as I go and what kind of scopes it opens up. The topic given to us today is scope of experimentation in campus theatre. First word, scope. what enables that scope? The institution within which we function. What kind of scope does the institution give us? Do we have to hire a space when we have to put up a play? Are there specific parts of the college where we can perform? If we perform in a certain space which is considered as a sacred space in college, like a chapel space, what happens? What are the repercussions which can take place after that? What are the spaces that we can use to perform our plays? What scope does the college give us to do things? Just to take the question of economics, I would say that yes, a lot of college plays are limited by the very fact that budget constraints stop them from doing plays in a certain manner. But again, that's also an enabling condition in a major way. It pushes a lot of college groups to think in abstract terms, to think in terms of stylization and abstraction, which a lot of people with a lot of money won't do in their plays. And I have seen that happen in this college. I'll again come back to the topic of scope later. When I talk about experimentation, I would be largely looking at experimentation at the level of form, experimentation at the level of content, and as I've seen it happening here. And campus theatre. The very term campus theatre doesn't, we have to always keep in mind that there is, like as I see the thing, there's nothing called the campus is always brought into being. The campus is brought into being by the very performances that you do. The campus is brought into being by the very protests that you stage. The campus is brought into being by the various societies that function inside the campus. The campus is every year renewed and brought into being in every individual college, in every individual space. Now, once I've dealt with that, I'll share an anecdote regarding what brings me back to the campus theatre model. I was talking to this director from Bengal called Probir Guho, who has been doing a lot of work with people from the villages, essentially with communities which he terms as the oppressed communities, people who don't have the money to go to the city and watch proscenium plays. And I asked him that, I have seen that over the last 35 years your group has changed a lot. How do you maintain the level of productions? How do you maintain the level of argumentation in your work? How do you maintain the rigor in your work? He says, my biggest inspiration is campus theatre in a way. The very fact that I work with a new bunch of people every year, that refreshes my way of working. My acting methodology, I can't consolidate it at any point of time. The things that I think every time always changes with the individual group of people that I work with. And he pointed out another thing about campus theatre which he found very interesting, that is campus theatre always, whenever he looked at the model, he said what really influenced him was the very idea that it gave a lot of people who don't come from a theatre background the hope and the aspiration that they can do theatre. I felt that as a very important thing, that when you come into the college and all the students get together to put up a play, there are people who have not come from a theatre background, who have never acted, they feel shy, but the very fact that their friends are asking them to go up and do something, and in that limited time they suddenly become something for them, for each other, in their performances that they put up. Now, gradually going into the experimentations that I have seen, say for instance, I'll be referring to specific productions. There was a production which all of you might not remember, but there was a production called Ibn Battuta which took place, of which I was a part. And Ibn Battuta was characteristic in the nature of the way the production had evolved. We had thought that we will have a play which will represent or assert difference on a linguistic level. And all of us were performing different kinds of vignettes or from different languages. Say I was performing something from Bidrohi, a poem by Kazi Nazrul Islam. Another person was performing a piece by Ilanko Atikar, Sila Patikar, that was being performed. So every one of us were bringing in these little pieces. And we were wondering, isn't this becoming just a set of monologues on stage? What is the audience taking back at the level of impressions for just the sounds that they're hearing? How do we connect with an audience which will not possibly, everyone will not understand Bengali, everyone will not understand Malayalam, everyone will not understand Tamil. So at the level of narrative, at the level of form, what are the changes can we bring about? And we tried out different formations in which we can line the people. We tried out different kinds of experimentations at the level of connecting it with sounds. The one thing that was really holding us back at all points of time was the nagging thought that we can't tie all these different 7 sets of linguistic deliveries into one coherent narrative. And we were constantly thinking that we have to make it into a one narrative, one plot. Eventually we never did that. There was a reason why we never did that. The reason was that we chose to we chose to let the people take back a certain fractured notion where all these people can exist together and not as part of one grand narrative or one complete whole. We chose to keep it as separate and individual as that. There were times, there were 3-4 productions, there were 3 stagings I think, in which we realized that sometimes the person of one linguistic performance was doing it really well, the other one was doing it well in another production. And we could really feel that the tensions that were being set into motion by these different people doing their individual bits really well in one of these productions was really saying something about the way we connect with our languages. In a way, that was one of the motives or the intents of the group that put up the play. Whenever I think of experimentation happening in campus theatre, I'm always pushed to think, isn't the experimentation being controlled by one person? Or is the experimentation being brought into being by several persons who's putting up the play together? More often than not, we fall back on that one figure, the director, who will bring about the different things that can happen at the level of the play. But then, in campus theatre, you have the work being meted out to different people that look after this light design. Like when I was working with Shakespeare, that's the format that I used to see all the time, and it really sort of struck me as interesting that a person would be given a script of the play, say Macbeth, and the person would be said, bring your own set design. The person with the lights would be told, bring a set of light design depending on the different scenes in the play. And then all of us, once we have these different ideas in order, we would start initiating a dialogue between these different things. At that level, a kind of experimentation happens, which can't be sort of said that the experimentation was controlled by one central figure all the time. In Macbeth, one of the things that I saw happening was whenever we stage Shakespeare at a college level, in a certain level, at different levels, placing them at different levels. With the next year, with Tempest, I saw an experimentation happening at the level of space, where you took the audience out into the cafe lawns, mess lawns, and you did the performance there. And when you did the performance at the mess lawn space, I really thought that, are you not replicating the proscenium model at a certain level? Because you again had the audience sitting in a proscenium manner away from the performance space in a way. Where are you really reaching into the audience's arena or making the spectator feel a bit discomforted? One of the major things that really pushed my interest in theatre was something that Sir used to tell us, Professor Ashley used to tell us, that your plays shouldn't allow the people go back home with a comforted notion that their biases have been reaffirmed. Your play should always make people feel uncomfortable about the things that they're seeing. They should feel uncomfortable about the positions they hold. I don't know how much we succeeded, but that was the impulse that always drove us in the work that we have tried to do. Another thing that really sort of was formative in my experience in theatre was a course in Jadavpur's curriculum called Drama in Practice. That was quite handy. It was a 6-month course where we took up a play text which we would adapt on our own with the help of the professor who was conducting the course, who is Professor Anandullah. We would adapt that entire play, and in the process of that adaptation, we would bring in our own individual excellences as well as limitations into the performance. And over a period of 6 months, one play would evolve which we would take around the city for performance. We never took it outside the city. But what it did was, it was institutionally made into a course. It was an honors course, an institutional honors course, which allowed people to explore the idiom of theatre at the level of pedagogy, where they really tried to understand how can theatre affect our understandings at an interpersonal level, at the level of grasping a literary text. I am from an English literature background. A lot of us read this English literature text, play text, and wonder how it would look on stage. And we look at videos. The most innovative departure that happened with Drama in Practice was we took up the text in the syllabus and we did it our way, the way we thought was relevant to us. And it still continues. That was quite an important thing. When you think of experimentation, the things that really influenced my ideas about experimentation in a major way was the little bit of avant-garde work, or as it called itself, alternative work in Bengal that had happened. We used to do this set of works for a group largely inspired by Grotowski's principles, where we chose different city spaces, where we made the spectator sit in a certain way, and our projects was always aimed at generating shock among the audience. The shock could be at a very superficial level, like the fact that we used to perform in our underwears, all of us in front of the audience every single day, and that used to be quite a shock for them at times. And also at the level of dialogue that was set up in the play, and that was something that I really found interesting. That is, the play always used to stop at a certain point, and then we would look at the audience and we would ask the audience, can you share your experiences about what you just saw? What do you feel about this? Can you sort of give us a model out of it? And this is a model that we derived from not just Grotowski, but from someone called Augusto Boal and his model of forum theatre, where you stop the play at a certain point and then you ask the audience for a solution as to what you can do with the play. The audience poses a solution, you ask that member of the audience to step into the arena and carry the production from that point of time, while some of the actors are still there. And then gradually there comes a point when the spectators are themselves doing the acting and the actors have left the complete space. So we did that to an extent. But what I always thought was that in that whole exercise of doing avant-garde theatre, we were always choosing our audience as avant-garde audience. We were never choosing our audience as an audience which will feel a bit shocked or moved by what is happening, or will start responding to the play in a manner which is not pleasant. Then coming back to taking off from that point, certain things that strike me regarding experimentation is that when you have plays happening in college, there are certain issues, like he was pointing out, there are certain issues which are always forgotten. For instance, a lot of us in Delhi come from different linguistic backgrounds. In NST, there is a major case of actors actually resisting the fact that they have to do productions in Hindi. Why do people coming from different parts of the country have to do productions in Hindi? Similarly, when we come here as a linked language, why do we always fall back upon English? There are different literary societies here who are trying to put up their own language productions. But then how do you deal with this very fact that these individual languages have their own individual cultures which want to assert themselves? Yeah. How does that come into being? What kind of work can we do at that level of negotiating our different identities? Second would be the issue of the body. A lot of us at this age face problems regarding the way we perceive our body and the way other people perceive our body. What is the work going on regarding that? There can be experimentation, and these are just experimentations at the level of narrative. And finally, a request that whatever kind of experimentations that you do in campus theatre, there is an urgent need that you start documenting and criticizing that over a period of time. You have to document it extensively at the level of video, at the level of audience reception, so that posterity can take back something from it, so that people who do the productions later can look back on those just not as photographs, but how the plays were done back then and how we can take forward a production from there.